The arrangement was, by all accounts, perfect. Eleanor and Julian Croft were the kind of couple you read about in magazines. Effortlessly elegant, philanthropic, and deeply in love. They had everything, except the one thing they wanted most. When they chose me to be their surrogate, it felt less like a transaction and more like a calling. I was a pediatric nurse. I had seen the quiet, desperate ache in the eyes of parents who couldn't conceive. My own body was healthy and capable. The decision felt simple, pure. I was giving a gift. They spared no expense. From the moment the embryo transfer was successful, I was treated like a precious piece of porcelain. They insisted I leave my job and my small apartment in the city and move into the guest house on their sprawling, secluded estate. "We want you to have zero stress, Sarah," Eleanor had said, her hand gently resting on my arm. "Clean air, organic food prepared by our private chef, prenatal yoga. We want this to be a beautiful, peaceful journey for all of us." The guest house was a masterpiece of minimalist luxury, a sun-drenched cottage with views of a serene, private lake. It was a gilded cage, though I didn't see the bars at first. They were so kind, so attentive, it felt churlish to notice that my car was back at my old apartment, that the Wi-Fi was spotty, or that the cell service was almost non-existent this far out in the country. They anticipated my every need. Fresh flowers appeared weekly, books I'd mentioned wanting to read would be left on my doorstep. It was easy to sink into the comfortable, cotton wool world they had created for me, to let the days blur into a peaceful, pregnant haze. My contact with the outside world became a thin, fraying thread. My family lived in another state, and the time difference made calls difficult. My friends, busy with their own city lives, slowly grew accustomed to my brief, cheerful texts sent whenever I could find a bar of service. I was isolated, but I told myself it was a beautiful, chosen isolation, a 9-month retreat to create a miracle. As the pregnancy progressed, Eleanor and Julian's excitement was a palpable thing. They were constantly preparing. Julian, a tech CEO, had taken on the nursery as his personal project. It was going to be a smart nursery, a high-tech wonderland of monitors and sensors that could track the baby's breathing, temperature, and movements, all synced to a cloud server they could access from anywhere. He was like a kid with a new toy, showing me the top-of-the-line baby monitor, explaining how the encrypted cloud storage would keep a video and audio log of every precious moment. "We don't want to miss a single thing," he'd said, his eyes shining with a pure, uncomplicated joy. The discovery, the moment my peaceful dream curdled into a waking nightmare, was an accident. A stupid, mundane accident. Julian had been in the guest house, showing me how the baby monitor app worked on his tablet. He was called away by an urgent work call and left in a hurry, leaving the tablet behind on the coffee table. I picked it up, intending to run it over to the main house, but the screen was unlocked, the baby monitor app still open. I saw a list of saved video files, mostly tests he had been running. Nursery test 1, audio level check. My curiosity was innocent. I just wanted to see the technology in action. I clicked on a file labeled Night Vision Test, Main Bedroom. The video was dark, grainy footage of their own bedroom. It must have been a test from the night before. I was about to close it when I heard their voices, muffled but clear. They must have forgotten the monitor was still recording to the cloud. "Did you talk to the agency about the postnatal contract?" It was Eleanor's voice, but it was different. Stripped of the warm, gentle tone she always used with me, it was cold, clinical, and sharp. "I handled it," Julian replied. "The addendum is being drafted. It'll cover the extended recovery period." "Good. A year should be enough time to ensure a proper bond, and to make sure there are no complications." A cold knot of confusion began to tighten in my stomach. An extended recovery period? A year? My contract stipulated a 6-week recovery with postnatal check-ins. What if she fights it? Julian's voice was a low murmur. "She won't. She's a nurse, not a lawyer, and she's emotionally invested. She thinks she's our friend. By the time the baby is born, she'll be so tired, so overwhelmed, she'll sign anything we put in front of her. We'll frame it as a private nursing contract, a generous one. It's the cleanest way. I felt my blood run cold. They weren't talking about my recovery. They were talking about my captivity. They were planning to keep me here, to trap me after the birth under the guise of a nursing contract. And her family, her friends? What about them? Eleanor's voice was dismissive. Her mother lives 1,000 miles away. Her friends are city people who barely have time for a text. We'll tell them she's suffering from severe postpartum depression and needs constant, private care. We'll say we're protecting her, protecting the baby from her instability. Who are they going to believe, us or the hysterical new mother we paint her to be? It's the perfect narrative. I couldn't breathe. My hand flew to my mouth, stifling a gasp. The guest house, once a sanctuary, suddenly felt like a tomb. I was not a gift giver. I was an incubator, a vessel. And once my purpose was served, I was to become a permanent fixture, a live-in nanny for the child I had carried, a prisoner in their perfect, beautiful home. I frantically swiped back to the main file directory on the tablet. I saw another folder, simply labeled S. My name, Sarah. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely click on it. Inside were not videos, but documents. A deep dive background check on me, far more comprehensive than the one the surrogacy agency had done. It highlighted my lack of a strong local support system, my distant family. It had notes in the margins in what I recognized as Eleanor's elegant script. Ideal candidate, low risk of outside interference. There was a draft of the nursing contract she had mentioned, a terrifying legal document full of confusing clauses about psychological fitness and custodial proximity. And then the final, horrifying discovery, a log of their browser history from the tablet. How to gain emergency guardianship over a mentally unfit surrogate. Laws regarding postpartum psychosis and parental rights. Can a surrogate be legally compelled to remain near the child? They weren't just planning to keep me here. They were building a case, a legal framework to strip me of my rights, to paint me as crazy, and to ensure that I would never, ever leave. The baby wasn't the only thing I was carrying that they intended to keep. They intended to keep me. I looked down at my own swollen belly, at the gentle flutter of the life inside me, a life I had been so happy to give, and I was overcome with a terror so absolute, so profound, that it felt like I was drowning. I had to get out. But how do you escape from a prison when the walls are made of concern and the warden is convinced he's your savior? I placed the tablet back on the coffee table, my mind a screaming chaos. I forced myself to walk slowly, calmly, back to my bedroom. I sat on the edge of the bed, my hands wrapped around my belly, and I took a deep, shuddering breath. Panic was a luxury I couldn't afford. They were watching me, not just on cameras, but with their own attentive, caring eyes. Any change in my behavior, any hint of fear or distress would be noted, logged, and used as a symptom of the instability they were already planning to document. I had to become a better actor than they were. I had to continue to be the grateful, simple, and slightly naive surrogate they believed me to be. My life and the life of the child I was carrying depended on my performance. The world outside my window, the serene lake, and the whispering trees no longer looked peaceful. It looked like a wall. I was miles from the nearest town, with no car and no one to call. I was a prisoner, and the due date was no longer a joyful milestone. It was a deadline, a countdown to my permanent incarceration. The days that followed were a masterclass in controlled terror. Every interaction with Eleanor and Julian was a performance. I would smile when they brought me my prenatal smoothies, my stomach churning with the knowledge that their kindness was a form of anesthetic, designed to keep me calm and docile before the operation to sever me from my own life. I would listen to their excited chatter about the baby, a life they spoke of as a beautiful, treasured object they had acquired, and I would nod and coo, all while a silent scream was trapped in my chest. I needed a plan, but to make a plan, I needed information. I began to observe, to listen, to turn my gilded cage into an intelligence-gathering operation. I learned the routines of the house. The chef and the housekeeper came on Mondays and Thursdays. A landscaping crew came on Wednesdays. A grocery delivery service, Valley Organics, came every Tuesday morning. These were the only cracks in the hermetically sealed world of the estate. I also learned the extent of my own surveillance. When I complained of a headache, Eleanor had a blood pressure cuff on my arm within minutes. When I mentioned I was having trouble sleeping, a new, pregnancy-safe herbal tea appeared on my nightstand. They were not just caring for me, they were monitoring me, their human asset. The beautiful, smart nursery Julian was building was not just for the baby. Its cameras, its sensors, they would be for me too. My phone was useless, a dead weight in my pocket. I knew any call or text could be tracked. The Wi-Fi, which I now realized was intentionally throttled and weak, was a trap. I couldn't research escape routes or contact help without them knowing. I was completely cut off, a digital castaway on a luxurious island. My only hope was the Tuesday grocery delivery. The driver was a young man named Leo, a local with a kind, open face who always had a cheerful word for me. He was my only regular link to the outside world. He was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but he was all I had. I needed a way to communicate with him, a way that wouldn't arouse suspicion. The plan started to form around a lie of my own. I waited for Julian to be in the guest house, tinkering with some new piece of baby tech. I accidentally dropped my phone, letting it clatter to the hardwood floor. I picked it up, my face a mask of distress. "Oh no," I said, my voice trembling. "The screen is completely shattered. It's not turning on." Julian rushed over, all concern. "Don't worry," he said. "We'll get you a new one." "No," I said quickly, thinking on my feet. "My sister's birthday is next week. I had all these plans to coordinate a surprise gift with her. I can't miss it." I let a few tears well up in my eyes. "It's silly, I know." "It's not silly at all," he said, falling perfectly into my trap. "We'll just get you a new phone today." "I don't want to be a bother," I said, playing the part of the grateful, considerate surrogate. "I have an idea. The grocery delivery comes tomorrow. I could ask the driver, Leo, to pick up a cheap prepaid phone for me in town. A burner. Just so I can call my sister. I'll give him the cash. It'll be our little secret. I don't want Eleanor to think I'm being demanding." I watched his face. I saw the calculation in his eyes. A Gurner phone was untraceable. It was a risk. But my story was plausible. My tears were convincing, and my request to keep it a secret from Eleanor played into his own sense of being my primary protector. "Okay," he said finally, "but you let me handle it. I'll talk to the driver. It'll be our little secret." It was even better than I had hoped. By making him my co-conspirator, I had made my request seem less suspicious. He thought he was helping me coordinate a surprise party. In reality, he was handing me the key to my own escape. The next morning, I watched from my window as Julian had a quiet word with Leo, the delivery driver, slipping him a few $100 bills. Leo looked surprised, but he nodded. The entire transaction took less than a minute. The wait for the next Tuesday delivery was the longest week of my life. I had to maintain my performance, to act like the only thing I was worried about was my sister's birthday, all while my mind was screaming with the terror of my impending deadline. When Leo arrived the following week, he had the usual boxes of organic vegetables and a small, nondescript paper bag. He handed it to me with a shy smile. "Here you go," he said quietly. "Mr. Croft said this was a surprise." "Thank you, Leo," I said, my voice barely a whisper. "You have no idea what this means to me." No problem, he said, turning to leave. Wait, I said, my heart pounding. I had to take the risk. My sister, she's an old friend of yours from high school. Maria Jensen. She said to say hi. I had seen his last name on his uniform. I had spent hours on the weak Wi-Fi, scrolling through the town's high school alumni pages on social media until I found him, and then I found his list of friends. It was a desperate, flimsy connection, but it was all I had. He stopped. He looked at me, a flicker of confusion in his eyes. I don't think I know a Maria Jensen, he said. My heart sank. Oh, I said, trying to keep the despair out of my voice. I must have the wrong person. Sorry. He was about to leave, but he hesitated. He looked around, at the opulent main house, at the security cameras mounted on the trees. He looked back at me, at my swollen belly, at the fear I was trying so hard to hide in my eyes. And in that moment, something shifted. He saw me, not as the pampered surrogate, but as a person. Look, he said, his voice a low whisper. My next delivery is a week from today, same time. If your sister needs anything else picked up in town, you make sure to write me a list, a very specific list. He gave me a long, meaningful look, and then he was gone. He knew. He didn't know the details, but he knew I was in trouble, and he had just offered me a lifeline. I went back inside, the small, cheap burner phone clutched in my hand. It wasn't just a phone. It was a promise. It was hope. The burner phone was my secret, a small black rectangle of pure potential. I kept it hidden, wrapped in a sweater at the bottom of a dresser drawer. My hand constantly strained to touch it, to reassure myself it was real. The first call I made was to my sister, not Maria Jensen, the fictional friend, but my real sister, Amy. I waited until I knew Eleanor and Julian were at a prenatal appointment in the city, a rare moment when I was truly alone. I walked to the far end of the lake, to a small clearing where the cell service was a little stronger, my heart pounding with a mixture of terror and exhilaration. Sarah! Amy's voice was a shock, a sound from a life I had almost forgotten. Where are you? Your texts have been so weird lately. The dam broke. I told her everything, the words tumbling out in a frantic, whispered torrent. The baby monitor, the conversations, the background check, the plan to keep me prisoner. I told her about Leo, the burner phone, the desperate, flimsy hope I was clinging to. She listened in stunned, horrified silence. When I was done, her voice was shaking with a rage that was so fierce it felt like a physical warmth through the phone. I'm coming to get you, she said. I'll be there in 2 days. No, I said, the word a painful lump in my throat. You can't. They're powerful, Amy. They'll have lawyers, stories. They'll say I'm unstable and you're my accomplice. They're already building the narrative. We can't just run. We have to be smart. We need a plan. And we need proof that can't be explained away. I told her about the cloud storage on the tablet. I knew I couldn't risk getting caught with it again. I needed a way to get the files out. Amy, a software engineer, was my only hope. Is there any way, I asked, to access a cloud server if you know the device it's linked to? Maybe, she said, her voice shifting from a sister's rage to a professional focus. It's not easy, but it's possible. I'll get to work. My next call was to a domestic violence shelter in a city 3 states away. I chose one at random, a place so far from Eleanor and Julian's sphere of influence that I hoped I would be safe. I spoke to a woman with a calm, steady voice. I told her a version of my story, leaving out the surrogacy, framing it as a case of controlling partner and forced isolation.
She didn't question me. She just listened. And then she gave me a list of things I would need to do to escape cleanly, a list of legal aid societies, of what documents to take, of how to cover my tracks. For the first time, I felt like I wasn't fighting alone. I had a small, secret army on my side. The final piece of the puzzle was Leo. On his next delivery, I was ready. I handed him my grocery list, and tucked inside it was another list and a small envelope of cash. My sister's list. It had 3 items: a large, high-capacity USB flash drive, a bus ticket from the nearest town to a city 2 hours away, and a request. A single, terrifying request. Next Tuesday, the note read. Same time. Wait for me at the end of the driveway. Please. I didn't know if he would do it. It was a huge risk for him. But the look in his eyes the week before had given me a sliver of hope. That night, Amy called with a breakthrough. She had found a back door, a security flaw in the Smart Nursery's software. She could get in. She had written a small, simple program that I could run from the tablet itself. It would copy every file from the cloud storage onto a flash drive. You'll only have one shot at this, Sarah, she warned me. The program will erase itself after it runs. You have to get the tablet, run the program, and get the flash drive out without them knowing. The opportunity came 2 days later. Eleanor and Julian were hosting a small, elegant dinner party. It was a perfect storm of distraction. While they were busy entertaining their wealthy friends, I feigned a sudden bout of fatigue and excused myself back to the guest house. My heart was a frantic drum against my ribs. This was it. I found the tablet in the nursery, where Julian had been showing it off to their guests. My hands were slick with sweat as I plugged in the flash drive Leo had brought me. I navigated to a specific website Amy had given me, entered a code, and the program began to run. A small, simple progress bar appeared on the screen. It was the slowest, most agonizing 5 minutes of my life. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant laugh from the main house felt like a footstep approaching the door. Finally, the transfer was complete. I ejected the flash drive, my hands shaking so badly I almost dropped it. I put the tablet back exactly where I had found it and crept out of the nursery. I went back to my guest house and hid the flash drive, the small plastic rectangle that held my entire future, in the lining of my suitcase. The evidence was secured, the escape route was planned. All that was left was to wait for Tuesday, to wait for Leo, to pray that he would be there. The final days were a blur of almost unbearable tension. I was a vessel of secrets, carrying a baby, a flash drive, and a plan that could either save my life or get me trapped forever. The morning of my escape, I woke before dawn. I dressed in the darkest, most practical clothes I had. I wrote a short, simple note and left it on the bed, a final piece of misdirection. I'm not feeling well, going for a walk by the lake to get some fresh air. I took my hidden burner phone and the flash drive. My small suitcase was already packed, hidden in the closet. I waited, my ear pressed to the window, listening for the familiar rumble of the Valley Organics delivery truck. When I finally heard it, a wave of adrenaline so powerful it almost made me sick washed over me. I grabbed my suitcase, took one last look at the beautiful, gilded cage I had called home, and I walked out. The walk down the long, winding driveway was the most terrifying journey of my life. Every rustle of leaves in the trees sounded like an approaching footstep. Every bird call sounded like an alarm. I expected to hear my name being called, to see Julian's car come racing up behind me. But there was nothing, just the sound of my own ragged breathing and the crunch of gravel under my feet. And then I saw it. The green and white delivery truck parked at the end of the driveway, just as I had prayed it would be. Leo was in the driver's seat, his face pale and tense. He saw me, and his eyes widened. He pushed the passenger door open. I didn't hesitate. I threw my suitcase in and scrambled up into the cab. "Go," I whispered. my voice choked with a mixture of terror and relief. He put the truck in gear, and we pulled away, leaving the silent, luxuriant estate behind us. As we turned onto the main road, I didn't look back. I was free. But I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that Eleanor and Julian Croft were not the kind of people who would let their most prized possession simply walk away. The escape was over. The fight for my life was just beginning. Leo drove me to the bus station in the next town over, a place of beautiful, noisy anonymity. He refused to take any more money. My sister would have wanted someone to help her, was all he said, a quiet confirmation that he had understood my clumsy lie all along. He was a good man, a stranger who had become an unlikely hero in my story. I got on the bus, my heart a wild, frantic bird in my chest. With every mile that passed, the manicured prison of the Croft estate grew smaller in the rearview mirror of my mind. The journey was a long 3-day odyssey across the country, a series of bus transfers and cheap motels, all paid for in cash. I was a ghost, a pregnant woman with a secret on a flash drive, running for her life. When I finally arrived in the city where the domestic violence shelter was located, I was exhausted, terrified, but also filled with a fierce, unfamiliar sense of my own strength. The shelter was my sanctuary. It was a simple, clean place, filled with the quiet, resilient hum of women who were all survivors of their own private wars. For the first time in almost a year, I wasn't being watched. I wasn't being managed. I could eat what I wanted, sleep when I wanted, and speak without my words being cataloged. I had a small, private room and a lock on the door. It was the greatest luxury I had ever known. I immediately contacted the legal aid society the shelter had recommended. I was assigned a lawyer, a sharp, tireless woman named Maria, who specialized in cases of coercive control and reproductive coercion. I told her my entire story, from the first perfect meeting with the Crofts to the frantic escape in the delivery truck. When I was done, I plugged the flash drive into her laptop. "This is everything," I said. "The background check, the contract, the browser history, and the conversations from the baby monitor." We spent hours going through the files. Maria's expression grew grimmer with each click. "This is not just a contract dispute, Sarah," she said when we were done. "This is a criminal conspiracy. False imprisonment, wire fraud, attempted kidnapping. They didn't just want to keep you. They were building a legal framework to make you disappear." The next steps were a blur of legal strategy and police reports. Maria contacted the authorities in the state where the Crofts lived. At first, they were skeptical. The Crofts were powerful, respected members of their community. My story sounded fantastical, the paranoid ramblings of a hysterical, pregnant woman, the very narrative Eleanor had been so confident would protect them. But the evidence on the flash drive was undeniable. The audio of their own voices, coolly plotting my captivity, was the smoking gun. A multi-state investigation was launched. The Crofts, of course, denied everything. When the police showed up at their estate, they played their parts perfectly. They were the worried, heartbroken parents whose beloved surrogate, clearly suffering from a severe prenatal mental breakdown, had tragically run away. They produced their own documentation, emails detailing their concern over my erratic behavior, emails I now realize they had been writing for months for this exact purpose, and a statement from a private doctor who claimed to have diagnosed me with a high-risk psychological condition. They were trying to gaslight the police, but their lies began to unravel. The metadata on the audio and video files was authenticated. Their financial records were subpoenaed, revealing the large sums of money they had moved in preparation for my long-term care. And then their own staff began to talk. The chef, the housekeeper, they spoke of the couple's obsessive, controlling behavior, of the prison-like atmosphere of the estate.
The final nail in their coffin was Leo. He came forward, his testimony corroborating my story of isolation and a planned escape. The media got hold of the story, and it exploded. The surrogate in the gilded cage, the fairy tale couple, was revealed to be a pair of sophisticated monsters. They were arrested and charged with a litany of crimes. Their perfect, curated world had been brought crashing down by a hacked baby monitor and the courage of a few good people. I gave birth to a healthy baby boy in a secure hospital, surrounded by the quiet strength of the women from the shelter and the fierce protection of my sister, who had flown in to be with me. Holding him in my arms was a moment of such profound, heart-wrenching complexity. I had carried him, protected him, and escaped with him. But he was not mine. He was the son of two people who were about to go to prison. The legal battle over his future was long and painful. The Crofts, from their jail cells, tried to fight for custody to be given to Julian's sister. But the investigation revealed that she had been aware of their plan, another silent co-conspirator. In the end, the court terminated their parental rights. The baby, a boy I had secretly called Leo, was placed in the foster care system, destined for adoption. I had to make a choice. I could have fought for custody myself. My lawyer said I would have had a strong case. But I looked at my own life, a life I was just beginning to rebuild from the ashes, and I looked at this tiny, perfect baby, and I knew I couldn't give him the life he deserved, a life free from the shadow of their parents' crimes. The most loving thing I could do, the final, truest gift I could give him, was to let him go. I said goodbye to him in the hospital, a quiet, tearful farewell, a promise whispered to his tiny ear that he would be loved, that he would be safe. It's been a few years. I have a new life, a quiet one. I went back to nursing. I work in a small community clinic. I have a small apartment filled with plants that are all my own. Sometimes, late at night, I think about him. I get anonymous updates from the adoption agency, pictures of a smiling boy with a loving family. He is happy. He is thriving. He is safe. And in the end, that's the only thing that ever really mattered. The Crofts tried to buy a baby, and in their arrogance, they tried to own a mother too. But some things are not for sale. A woman's freedom, her strength, her spirit, and the fierce, protective love for a child, you know you have to let go.